Hello, my name is Shalom Aretz. I am a major in the IDF Reserves. I have degrees in international relations, political science, sociology. I also have been looking at and keeping a close eye on Syria for the last 14 years, basically, since the Civil War started and even before that. And today I'm going to be looking at a video by Preston Stewart on his channel where he looks at the recent events in Syria. We'll go through what I disagree with, which is a lot. Not the basic analysis, but where he places the emphasis. And from there also to look at how different sources in the West try to play the even hand, try to play the everyone's at fault card, even when some sides are worse than the other. And so without further ado, let's begin watching the video.
Well, finally, it looks like a ceasefire in Syria is holding, which comes after at least 250 people were killed amidst claims from two different groups that they were being exterminated by the other. So today we're going to walk through what we know so far based off of a few news outlets and official statements from Syrian, Israeli, U.S., and Turkish leaders. Now, starting out with some reporting here from the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, they say Syria's government on Monday started evacuating Bedouin families trapped inside the southern city of Souaida, where deadly fighting between Druze militiamen and Bedouin fighters has largely stopped as a ceasefire takes hold. And I think it's worth starting today's video with a look at the map to give folks an idea of where exactly it is we're talking about.
So one thing, first of all, I want to speak about sources. He mentioned Al Jazeera, he mentioned the AP. I think with modern day conflicts, Telegram often has a much better pulse on the situation without it going through 10 different filters. Now, of course, you have to understand what Telegram channel you're looking at, but I will be bringing in different information that I've received from those channels. And from those channels, you can kind of see where the situation kind of actually is and why people feel the way they do. All right, because when you're only getting kind of like this sterilized big picture view from the regular media channels, then you're really not getting the feeling on the ground.
Of course, the broader Middle East here, this is Live UA Map. It's a public resource. I'll have linked in the description if you want to use it yourself. Here in the middle of the screen, we have Syria. The yellow portion of the northeast is Kurdish-controlled territories. The green area is the rest of Syria, currently under the control, to a degree, of the al-Shara government. Something we're going to get into in the back half of today's video are the different allegations of the role or lack of a role that the Syrian government is playing in this violence. Now, what we're focused on today, and have been for about a week, is down here in the southern portion of Syria and the Souaida government. And around the city of Souaida, right here in the middle, is generally where a lot of these Bedouin tribes lived, and then you had a lot of Druze in Souaida.
It's not really Druze here and then, or like Bedouins here and then Druze here, like you said. You have Al-Souaida, which is mainly Druze. Then you have quite a few different Druze villages around. Let's hear. This area is very Bedouin. This is Dara, right, which is very important in this story, is that you have Al-Souaida and then you have the province of Dara, where you have to go from Dara, which separates the Golan Heights from Souaida, okay? And it's mainly from Dara that the Bedouin tribes initially started their attack, right? Because you can see that's very close.
That's the core of the fighting as of late. Notably, just north, we have Damascus, the Syrian capital. To the west of Damascus, Lebanon. West of Souaida, the Golan Heights. And southwest of the Golan Heights, Israel.
Again, between Souaida and the Golan Heights is you have Dara, which is a big factor in all of the politics going on there.
Israel did play a very active role in the opening days, kind of the middle days of this, conducting airstrikes against Syrian military targets, to include their Ministry of Defense in Damascus. That layered on some confusion, but there have also been cries from the Druze to the Israeli people to come and protect them from the extermination being carried out by the Bedouins. So it's a lot. Nonetheless, it does sound like Israel has stopped carrying out airstrikes against any targets in Syria for at least a couple days now.
That's questionable. There have been different reports, mainly on smaller strikes. In terms of ministerial, kind of like things of the state, then yes, hasn't made any attacks for a while, since there seems to be an agreement between Israel and the Al-Shara regime, where basically the Al-Shara regime capitulated. We'll get into that later. But yeah, except for like some smaller kind of support roles, that seems to be correct for the last couple of days.
Now, moving back to an update on this ceasefire here, it does sound like around 250 people total lost their lives during the course of this fighting. That number may sound small right out the gate.
Because it is small. The figures that I'm seeing are way higher. 250 was really like the beginning of the conflict. It's hard to verify, and again, that's one of the problems when you are dealing with some of like the more unofficial sources. The official sources will only show what's like actually like proven, but unofficial sources, you're getting thousands of deaths, and that seems to be the more likely option.
Just, if you've seen some of the footage, it's been graphic. It's been pretty nasty, all things considered, and we've certainly seen elderly, women, children that are caught up in the killing. Definitely some mutilated bodies appear to have been tortured and executed. So when you see that nature of violence, it makes that 250 number seem actually a little bit small. I think it's safe to say it's not 250 armed fighters on the two sides that lost their lives here. But nonetheless, based off all the different sources I'm seeing right now, that tends to be where they land after 4 or 5 days worth of fighting. Now, Syrian state media said the Syrian government had coordinated with officials in Suwaida to bring buses to evacuate some 1,500 Bedouins and dozens of armed Bedouins alongside other clans from around.
Now, he doesn't get into what the ceasefire actually was, and I think that's really important. It's almost like a ceasefire is a ceasefire is a ceasefire, when in reality, what this is in the ceasefire is super important. So this current ceasefire was, in many ways, just a complete capitulation by the side of the Syrian government and the Bedouin tribes, where in the first stage, the Syrian government agreed, and then it took a while for the Bedouin tribes to actually uphold the ceasefire as well. And so part of that was removing Bedouins from the area of conflict. What the exact areas where they are removed from, if we're talking about people who lived there also, is actually, I'm still not quite sure, but that's part of the terms of the ceasefire. And when you get into the future about where they broke this ceasefire, broke that ceasefire, not all ceasefires are created equal.
The country who came to support them remained on the outskirts of Suwaida as government security force and military police were deployed on Sunday to oversee the exit from the entire province. And this was one of the many times in the last couple of days where it looked like this whole situation could just drastically spiral out of control. We saw Bedouin tribes that had been in conflict with each other, or at least had disagreements, lay down those disagreements to come together to move south to protect their brothers and sisters against the Druze.
To protect their brothers and sisters against the Druze, really need to. I think one of the main problems with Western media and with Western people in general is this constant need to look at both sides. This constant need to pretend that everyone is justified and everyone is good and there are bad people on both sides, whereas in truth, sometimes there is a good side and there is a bad side. If you would look at the social media of the troops going into Suwaida from all over Syria, first of all, most of them weren't Bedouin, so it's not like they're Bedouin brothers. It was just like Sunni Syrians, and it was a call for exterminations. These were rampant. Everyone was saying we need to get into Suwaida, we need to exterminate them, we need to kill them, we're going to chop them up, we're going to take them for whores, we're going to kill them all, okay? That was the social media surrounding this entrance into Al-Suwaida. Not, we need to protect our brothers and sisters. Sometimes it would have a connotation of that, and sometimes they would even show atrocities that they committed and then like repackage it as if it was what a Druze did to Bedouin. So very clearly there's a good side and a bad side here. And throughout this video, he will kind of always try to like make it kind of even-handed, but that's not the case. The powers going into Suwaida were there with the explicit purpose to exterminate the population. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. That was their stated goal, as you can see over and over and over again. Is there one or two people there who might not want to exterminate the Druze? Sure, maybe. But the vast majority, that was their thing. Okay?
The numbers there are pretty flexible. I saw everything from 10, 15,000 all the way north of 50,000 total Bedouin fighters there were reports of militias, is the best way to put this, tribal militias. There were reports that some in the Syrian army just took off their uniforms and joined their tribesmen moving south to...
Again, that's disingenuous. They weren't joining their tribesmen because most of them were not in tribes. They were joining the fighting in order to exterminate the Druze. Okay, what is the Syrian army right now? The Syrian army right now is made up of ex-HTS and all of these other militias, jihadist militias. Okay, like that's something that needs to be understood. The old Syrian army is no more, and the new Syrian army was completely and directly built up around the jihadist militias that were under Jolani's control. And so these aren't, it's by pretending that these are like Bedouins joining their Bedouin brothers to protect the Bedouins, you're deliberately whitewashing what actually happened.
To fight the Druze, that looked like it was going to get really nasty really quickly. Fortunately, after a little bit of fighting, and there certainly was some, it looks like the ceasefire went into place. The Bedouins moved to the outskirts of Suwaida and are kind of setting up an outer cordon, if you will, which has not led to a reduction in tensions or nervousness from the two sides. In fact, we just got a statement from one of the Syrian leaders saying, we still need international help. You see what's about to happen any moment now. Now, a statement from one of the Bedouins here, a farmer, Ali al-Hawarin, said that he called the attacks by the Druze fighters unjustified and doubted that the Syrian government will be able to keep control. And it's a major issue when looking at this situation, again, is what role, if any, is this...
And he brings up like this attack by the Bedouins before even talking about like the attack by the Druze, before talking about the Bedouins. It's like I have a real problem with this video and his attempt to be even-handed. I think that truth should be looked at even when it means putting the blame on one side.
Syrian government playing here. The Britain-based war monitor, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said that as part of this agreement that just went into effect, Bedouin fighters would have to release Druze women that they were holding captive and leave the province. It's not clear if they're...
I mean, like, yes, they were kidnapping and raping Druze women. This is widely reported. These aren't the good guys, okay?
Asking those to leave the province that currently call the province home, or if they're just going after those that traveled down to Suwaida to fight back against the Druze. Now, Syria's Druze community has largely celebrated the fall of Assad since that came about, a little less than a year ago. But as soon as al-Shara stepped up into power, previously Jolani, now al-Shara, there's been a lot of speculation that he's not going to be, that he's still going to be relatively militant towards the Druze people. And one of the Druze leaders, al-Haraji, that we'll get into more here in a minute, has taken a pretty confrontational approach so far with al-Shara, whereas the majority of the Druze figures seem to be more focused on a unified Syria.
Okay, so this is a complete misrepresentation of the situation. Al-Hijri is like the main Druze leader. Okay, so it's not like a collection of Druze leaders and there's one crazy guy and then there's a whole bunch of more moderates. No, it is the main Druze leader, Hijri, and then there are some very much smaller leaders. Okay, it's not just a numbers game of how many leaders, but in terms of how they're respected, what their power base is, and so on. And Al-Hijri didn't start out against the Syrian state. Back in February, in the first round of violence, there were smaller leaders on one side wanting more inclusion into Syria. There were smaller leaders on the other side which wanted to maybe break away from Syria to have their own autonomy and so on. And Al-Hijri was basically in the middle and was basically going almost more with the more conciliatory side, going to give the Syrian government a chance first. And only after the new outbreak, where massacres were taking place over and over again, Al-Hijri moved over to the side against the regime because of the atrocities being committed against the Druze people.
And I think a lot of this boils down to just plain trust. Do you think that Jolani, now al-Shara, is a changed man and wants to see a unified Syria with equal rights across all sects and religions? Or do you see him as a wolf in sheep's clothing that as soon as he is given the moment will try to persecute and kill the Druze and other minorities, or at the very least turn a blind eye to allow it to happen. That's a major split driving the two divergent opinions here. Now, Syrian's President al-Shara has tried so far to appeal to the Druze community while criticizing some of these factions that are more loyal to Hekmat al-Haraj.
Al-Shara, in my opinion, is not good at the game he's trying to play, but it turns out that the world is so gullible that even though he's really bad at playing this game of doublespeak, he's getting away with it. What do I mean by that? Al-Shara presents himself as a moderate, and the world eats it up, wants to normalize relations, reduce sanctions, everything. But he can't even do that, because when he's forming as a government, he's only putting former HDS people involved. When his troops are going in and massacring the Alawites, remember that part? And he looks the other way or doesn't get involved, or even people in his ministry say, well, just don't film it, okay? And now when it's going into Sueda, his first mode of action was to send his troops into Sueda, not as a peacekeeper, as Preston Stewart would like to portray it, but with the stated goal to demilitarize Sueda, to take away all the weapons from the militias in Sueda while they are getting massacred, right? It's like, yes, you're getting massacred, so I'm going to take away your weapons, and so you'll be defenseless, and then I'll protect you. Sure. How are you going to trust that, right? The issue is trust, and here it's completely a non-starter. And then, oh, well, now you're going against me, the president of Syria. And I think the other issue here is that it also kind of doesn't matter if he's incompetent, if he's pretending, or if he really, really wants to, but forces are beyond his control. Because at the end of the day, only the bad option for him, that this is what he wants, means that he's in any control at all. And if he's not in control, then the Syrian government is whoever making decisions, or it is the troops on the ground, and it doesn't really matter what he says. So it's not only about trust in the individual, but trust in the individual to actually produce outcomes. And I think more than anything, it's shown that he's not able to produce outcomes, usually.
Who's been involved in the clashes so far, and notably, we have seen a couple different occasions, 2 or 3 different ceasefires that were announced. The Druze agreed to it, and then they had this one leader, Sheikh Hekmat al-Haraji, say, no, actually, we're not on board.
Again, wasn't even the main guy from the people who are opposition to al-Hijri, who signed an agreement from the get-go, basically capitulating all of Sueda, will demilitarize everything, doing everything that the Syrian government would want.
Continue fighting, continue trying to kill any of the Bedouins or government forces that move down. In taking a look at the split here within the Druze community, we've got 2 leaders we're looking to for some statements. The first here, Laith al-Balous, said, quote, "We're not taking sides. We're defending Suwaida's dignity and..."
Laith al-Balous, he's one of the main figures, right? So he's even he's the main figure on the pro-regime side. He's pretty much a persona non grata at the moment in Sueda. In a lot of the different Druze Telegram channels, he's just simply a traitor, that he was trying to sell out the Druze. There were even reports that he was executed, and that got much fanfare. I don't know how much support he actually has at the moment, but I'm guessing it's not much.
Unity. We've tried to calm tensions, protect civilians, and push for dialogue, not violence. Despite threats, attacks, and even desecration of my father's grave, we didn't retaliate. We stood firm. We reject chaos and foreign agendas. We're for a united Syria, ruled by law, not blood. To Suwaida, we won't abandon you. To the world, act now. Don't just watch another tragedy.
So he's saying, even him is saying that the world needs to act, right? And even he is saying that they committed atrocities against, but I chose not to act. Sure, but he's not looked at well for that. He has his own little militia, and he stayed out of the fighting, but it would be a stretch to say that he represents many.
Tragedy unfold. So a lot of the focus there being on a unified Syria. Let's come together and make this Syrian project work. And it's similar statements that we saw from Balous last week as the fighting was kind of intensifying. He's been one of the leading voices helping to negotiate and agree to a couple of the different
I don't think he's been helping to negotiate anything. I don't think Al-Hijri or anyone else is really listening to him anymore.
ceasefires. On the other side of the conversation here, Hikmat al-Hijri, I feel like I'm always mispronouncing that, another Druze leader, has been a little more confrontational, and you can kind of get that in his statement he just put out earlier today, where he said, quote, "We call on the free world and all of the active forces therein, and we direct our calls to His Eminence President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and His Majesty King Abdullah II, and all who possess a force and influence in this world. Save al-Suwaida." He says, "For our people are being exterminated and being killed in cold blood. These are massacres being committed before the world's eyes, and the silence continues to kill. We call on the international community to bear its humanitarian and ethical responsibilities to stop these systematic and organized massacres. The mask has fallen from the face of this oppressive, tyrannical ruling gang. We also call on our Sunni people to take a clear stance towards what is happening to their Syrian brothers. We have never been enemies or adversaries, and we are no longer able to live with a regime that only knows how to rule by iron and fire and only knows how to exert authority through force and inflicting harm." And you're starting to see these
Yes, I agree. What is he saying there? Is I tried the other way, because he did, but the mask has fallen because it did. Because you have Syrian forces doing these massacres. And they went in as a Syrian regime, and then when they came to an agreement with Israel to pull out, the soldiers who wanted to just put on Bedouin garb. And there's a report that it was like units, complete units in totality, kind of just like changing a shirt and sometimes even forgetting to remove patches and then continue fighting. Only after they lost, both because of the troops on the ground and also because of the Israeli air support, then did they pull out. And so Hijri is really speaking from a place of strength here. He won, okay? This isn't some sort of neutral position anymore. The Druze, for the time being, won. That is why the ceasefire is holding, because the other side has recognized their loss.
lines start to separate. We have the Bedouins. The reason that we saw Bedouin tribes assemble from across the country and the fear that this was going to spark something even bigger were the allegations that Bedouins were being hunted down and exterminated by the Druze in Suwaida.
The reason why they assembled was because they wanted to exterminate the Druze. The cries for killing and the cries for blood and the cries for rape and the cries for extermination to kill off the religion of the Druze because of their heretical beliefs, this is the reason for the conflict. The spark was some Bedouin tribes against some Druze tribes, but throughout the conflict it had turned into jihad against the Druze in order to cleanse the land of Syria from the heretics.
And something I want to make clear is we have seen at this point video evidence of crimes, of war crimes, of illegal killings in, I think, every direction. We've seen government forces certainly involved with the mistreatment and execution of civilians. We've seen what appear to be Druze fighters executing Bedouins. We've seen Bedouins executing and
even him, look at the qualifier, what appears to be Druze fighters, because it's always much less clear, because on the most part, if you look at the most part, they have not. Al-Hijri, who he's demonizing, put out declaration after declaration: do not touch women and children, do not touch Bedouin property, do not touch anything that isn't yours, do not retaliate with massacres to the massacres that have occurred against us. That is what Al-Hijri has been putting out. And this attempt to say that there are bad people on both sides is wrong. Sure, there probably are bad people on all sides, and there are probably good people on all sides. But when one side is systematically calling for the extermination of a people, and the other side is saying we need to defend ourselves from extermination, there's a good side and there's a bad side.
mutilating Druze. So we're not going to go down the rabbit hole today of which one is worse. It does look like, big picture, there's a lot of pretty nasty violence in every direction. And
we're not going to go down like as if it's some sort of rabbit hole. Okay, again, it's this Western idea that you don't want to make any moral judgment. I mean, sure, they might be burning people alive. They might be humiliating and purposely trying to do the most humiliating things to people and then killing them. Not fighters, but old sheikhs, old respected members of the community being humiliated, having their mustache shaven, which is this, it's a symbol in the Druze religion for religious Druze, and then killing them in any case.
As of now, fortunately, it looks like it has all stopped for now. Now, turning to some of the, but notably there, Haraji is pointing not just at the Bedouins, but at the Syrian government. You notice in a part of that saying the mask has fallen off of this tyrannical regime. He's not singling out the Bedouins, he's looking at al-Shara. Now, turning to some statements from neighboring countries here, Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that Israel will continue to use military means to enforce its two red lines in Syria. And we've talked about this before. First, the demilitarization of the area south of Damascus. Second, the protection of the country's Druze minority. And we have seen a lot of calls, Druze to people in Israel saying, we need you, come protect us. And some very passionate responses of people in Israel wanting to do what they can to stand up and make sure they're able to protect their Druze brothers and sisters. Netanyahu said the Damascus regime violated both of those red lines in recent days. Quote, it sent an army south of Damascus into the area that should be demilitarized, and it began to massacre the Druze. We could not accept this in any way. Now, this was, I misspoke a second ago, and I said this was a statement earlier today. This was a statement last week, and this was right amidst the Israeli strikes against targets in Syria. But it's important to note here kind of the red lines that Israel has drawn out as we look at what the response is and should be from the current al-Shara government. Turkey, their foreign minister, just put out a statement earlier today saying they consider any attempts to divide Syria a national security threat and would intervene. So again, we've got some segments within the Druze community talking about pushing back against the actual Syrian government. Turkey, for one, is saying, no. This needs to be a unified Turkey. We cannot have disparate...
See how he misspoke there? Kind of this Freudian slip. It needs to be a unified Turkey. I think a lot of times people put Israel's actions as it's only like interest-based, and then Turkey is, just this malevolent actor. No. Turkey wants to control Syria, basically, right? And al-Shara, who got a lot of support from Turkey throughout the years, during different rebellions and different things, and the Turkish forces are still in Syria, and Turkish-backed militias are still heavily involved in Syrian politics. It's in Turkey's best interest to have a unified Syria under their protection, basically. So everyone has interests involved. The question is whether those interests align with good actions, or whether those interests are being pursued even when it means supporting massacres.
Groups taking over different portions of Syria. Tom Barak, the ambassador to Turkey, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and a special envoy to Syria, told the Associated Press yesterday, quote, the killing, the revenge, the massacres on both sides are intolerable, but the current government in Syria has conducted themselves as best they can as a new government with very few resources to address the multiplicity of issues that arise in trying to bring a diverse society together.
I almost think it's inconsequential whether it's as best they can or not, because either they are partners in crimes, or they are so unable to control their own forces and their own sides and their own militias that it doesn't matter anyway. So either you have power and you're not using it, or you don't have power and it's these other groups that are the real power in Syria.
Regarding Israel's strikes on Syria, Barak said, quote, the United States was not asked, nor did they participate in that decision, nor was it the United States' responsibility in matters that Israel feels for its own self-defense. However, he said Israel's intervention creates another very confusing chapter and came at a very bad time. Now, an important...
A very bad time for who? For it was inconvenient for the Trump administration that they were trying to get an agreement between Israel and Syria, and Israel stepped into Syria. Well, it was inconvenient that there was going to be an extermination event in Syria, right? Like the bad timing wasn't caused by Israel. The bad timing was that al-Shara couldn't play the game of being a nice guy even long enough to close a deal.
important piece here is the role of the Syrian government, because you are looking at sects and tribes and clans when you're getting into the Druze and the Bedouins. But we have a new Syrian government, and there's a lot of allegations flying in different directions. And it kind of varies between, this is, on the one hand, you've got Hikmat al-Haraj claiming that this is directly the Syrian government trying to kill off the Druze people. All the way over to the other side, I would argue, is the suggestion, we don't know exactly where it sits, that the government wants to help, but that they cannot. And that is kind of where the U.S. ambassador to Iraq seems to sit in all of this based off his...
Again, what's the difference in the end? Either the bad guys are in charge, or the guys in charge cannot stop the bad guys. So either way, they're both bad. The Syrian government, in terms of the people who are running Syria, are doing bad things. If Ahmad al-Shara himself is a nice guy or not is almost besides the point. If we are doing a trial for Ahmad al-Shara, sure. Does he deserve jail time because he committed crimes, or should he be lauded for his attempts to be good even though he failed? That's a different story. But when you're dealing with a country and the actions taken by actors in those countries, either you're in charge or you're not. But if bad things are happening, if it's the bad people who are actually running the show in terms of controlling your military, whether the figurehead on top is agreeing with it or not is besides the point.
Statements yesterday, starting with one extreme and kind of moving to the other, the argument that this is all being directed by al-Shara, as in the government forces were moving south to massacre the Druze, which is why Israel put their red line in the sand, saying one of the reasons that there can be no military movement south of Damascus. So
the stated goal of the Syrian government wasn't to massacre the Druze, even though they took part in it, but their stated goal was to demilitarize the Druze. Okay? Their stated goal was not just to provide peace. That's a key issue. Their stated goal was to enter into confrontation with the Druze in order to demilitarize them. Does that mean that they would have to do massacres? Probably not, but there would be fighting. So it is disingenuous to say that they were just going in as peacekeepers as a neutral party. They were going in to demilitarize the Druze in particular, not the Bedouins.
As those forces were moving south towards Suwaida a few days ago, al-Shara and the Syrian government said, we're going down to enforce peace. Israel looked at that and said, no, we can't risk any militarization along our border in that region. Also, we can't allow the Druze to be massacred. So Israel stepped in, started striking military assets. They were moving south. That kind of, in some ways, tied al-Shara's hands. This comes from the argument, the idea that al-Shara in this current government wants to massacre the Druze or any other Alawites on the West Coast or any others, comes from the idea that, or the argument that his past is unchanged, that he has past ties, of course, publicly known to Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and the Al-Nusra Front, all terrorist organizations with pretty violent track histories, to say the least. Supposedly, he became a changed man under HTS and did, to a degree, actually facilitate the targeting and killing of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State leaders. Nonetheless, there are a lot of folks, definitely some in Israel and definitely some in the...
This is silly, okay? If he's a changed man or not, if he can't control his militias, then it doesn't really matter. But in any case, there's always this thing that he's a changed man. How much can you change? He was cutting off people's heads. Even if he became 18 times more moderate, that's still pretty out there. And when he also fought against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yes, as internal power struggles. But you have ISIS symbology rampant in the Syrian army, where their flag, which they get away with because it could also not be ISIS, but everyone knows what we're talking about here. They wear it on their uniforms with patches. It's disingenuous to pretend that there isn't a mountain of evidence which shows that al-Shara is either super incapable, cannot control his troops, or still is jihadi. Those are the options at the moment, because his troops went into the Alawite strongholds on the coast and massacred the Alawites. And the same troops who did that were not punished. His troops went into Suwaida and committed massacres. I don't know if they're going to be punished. So to pretend that it's only his long lost past, where he grew up and is a changed man, is the only evidence against it. It's not true in any way.
United States, making the argument that really he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And given the opportunity, he's going to revert right back to his Al-Qaeda and Islamic State roots and start massacring as many minorities as he can. Some of the evidence to...
Now, a question is if he wants to massacre all the minorities. I think he might not want to massacre all the minorities, but he is very much pushing towards a jihadist state, right? He did not fight jihad for so many years for a pluralistic Syria. He fought jihad to have a Sunni Muslim state with Sharia law. And this has been in the new constitution. This is how he's reformed the Ministry of Education. This is how he formed his government. These are not simply ideas that perhaps he is still a jihadist. His ideology is still jihadism, right? He is still in a militant form of Islam, and that is directing how he is running the country.
Some of the evidence to support this could be in the fact that we did see some Syrian government troops participating in the desecration of Druze religious sites, the killing of some clear civilians in the south. If that can be linked, not just that they were wearing the Syrian military uniforms, but that they were ordered by the Syrian government, it falls in this camp. That this killing, the attempted extermination of the Druze, is being done by the al-Shara government. This isn't known at this point. I want to stress that. The other end of the spectrum here, I would argue, is that the al-Shara government wants to... When I say I want to argue, it's where I feel like these two extremes kind of sit. Not that I necessarily fall in one camp or the other quite yet. The argument here is that the al-Shara government wanted to intervene. And they said they did in the opening day, saying, hey, we are sending military forces south to put a stop to this violence and enforce peace.
And demilitarize the Druze.
I find some validity in this because there's no doubt the Syrian state is generally weakened right now, and they do not have the ability to project power like even Assad did in some of his last days.
But militias who are under the Syrian government control do have the ability to project power because they are all wrapped into the Ministry of Defense. A little bit of background, right? So what is the reason about demilitarizing the Druze is that after he took over, he made a push to fold in all of the different militias into the Ministry of Defense. So many militias. Most of them Sunni, a lot of them jihadi, a lot of them not, but were folded into the Ministry of Defense. The three main holdouts are the Druze, the Kurds, and also the Syrian National Army, which is controlled by Turkey, to the point where Turkey's even sent them to other countries to fight for them. And the purpose of going into Sweda, on the face of it, for him was to demilitarize the Druze. To do that during a massacre against the Druze, it just showed why they needed to have their own weapons and why they didn't get rid of their weapons up until now.
Part of the challenge here for the Syrian government, if they did actually want to help in the south, was as soon as they hit the road, they started catching Israeli hellfires and bombs.
Not as soon as they hit the road. They got to Sweda, they did massacres, and then Israel attacked.
Military forces been all that involved in Sweda since it began. Then there's this middle ground that I would argue is somewhat indifferent, kind of a mix of the two, where al-Shara maybe is okay with the killing of the Druze, he's okay with moving them out, and he's fine to just kind of stand by, and if it's not going to be his actual forces carrying it out, maybe it's even better to let the Bedouins do the killing, and he can say, hey, I'm trying to stand up this government, I'm doing the best I can, kind of like Barak is saying, Ambassador Barak, saying, hey, the Syrian government's doing all they can, they're just not all that capable of stopping all this stuff. That's kind of a middle ground here that might be playing out as well. But nonetheless, I thought it was worth highlighting a couple different scenarios that could be what the Syrian government is trying to do, because as of now, we are still continuing to see claims and allegations that the Bedouins are exterminating the Druze, that the Syrian government is exterminating the Druze, and that the Druze are exterminating the Bedouins. It's probably intentionally messy in some way, shape, or form, but nonetheless, big picture, that's about where things sit right now as ceasefire is in place, and hopefully it continues to hold. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.
All right, that's the video. I'm not going to repeat myself, but again, I think just his want to be even-handed, even with his that everyone's massacring everybody, is just a mess. It's disingenuous. when so much of the evidence shows how clearly these are one side going into the houses of the other side, right? That's how it started. That's how it continued. And so that's the video. His channel does do some good analysis. I'll link it below. And I have a video about my thoughts on what's happening in Syria, where I don't go into so much of the day-to-day details, but rather the big picture, what it means for Syria, and whether this is a step towards a Druze either independence or autonomy. And so you can check that out. And until next time, my name is Shalom Ba'aretz. You can reach me in the information below, and take care.